Frank Leslie, also known as Nashville Franklyn Leslie, has a background shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. His birthplace is uncertain, with some sources pointing to the vicinity of San Antonio, Texas, while others suggest Galveston. The exact year of his birth is also disputed, though it's believed to be around the early 1840s. Leslie's parentage remains a subject of debate. One version, based on a 1913 marriage document, names Bernard and Martha Leslie as his parents, hailing from Virginia and Kentucky respectively. An alternative account, published in the Tombstone Daily Prospector in 1889, proposes that his father was Thomas Kennedy and that Leslie adopted his mother's surname after a familial dispute. However, this newspaper report lacked credible sources to support its claims. Interestingly, Leslie's life prior to his mid-30s is largely undocumented. In his later years, he spun numerous tales about his earlier exploits, many of which seemed embellished or lacked verification. These stories included serving as a first lieutenant in the Confederate Army's 10th Cavalry, working as a deputy sheriff alongside the legendary Wild Bill Hickok in Abilene, and engaging in various adventurous pursuits across the globe. In 1893, Leslie presented yet another version of his life story to a San Francisco Chronicle reporter, describing it as a romance. This narrative placed his birth in Virginia in 1842 and claimed he studied medicine in Heidelberg, while his brother attended West Point. According to this account, the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 saw Leslie return to Virginia to serve as a Confederate bugler, while his brother fought for the Union. As with his other tales, no concrete evidence has been found to support these claims. The first verifiable records of Leslie's life emerged in 1878, when he was employed as a bartender in San Francisco. He resided at 732 Howard Street during this period. The following year, city records listed him as a bookkeeper, though this may have been an error, as he continued his work as a bartender. In mid-1880, Leslie relocated to Tombstone, Arizona, where his life would take on new dimensions. While Leslie's self-reported history is filled with grand adventures and remarkable claims, much of it remains unsubstantiated. What can be confirmed is that his documented life began in his later years in San Francisco and Tombstone, where he became a notable figure in Old West lore. Nashville Frank Leslie arrived in Tombstone, Arizona, in July 1880. His initial appearance was that of a frontier scout, clad in traditional buckskin attire. Standing at approximately 5 feet 7 inches and weighing around just 135 pounds, Leslie quickly adapted to the more refined fashion of urban gentlemen, though he retained his fringed buckskin vest as a nod to his frontier persona. This sartorial choice contributed to his emerging reputation as Buckskin Frank. Shortly after settling in Tombstone, Leslie entered into a business partnership with William H. Knapp. Together, they established the Cosmopolitan Saloon, situated adjacent to the Cosmopolitan Hotel on Allen Street. During his tenure at the hotel, Leslie developed a romantic interest in Mary Jane May Killeen, a chambermaid who had recently wed Mike Killeen. Leslie had been present at their nuptials in April 1880, serving as a witness. However, his growing closeness to May began to arouse suspicion in her husband. A fateful incident occurred on the evening of June 22, 1880. Leslie and May were seated together at the Cosmopolitan Hotel's front porch, with Leslie's arm draped around her. George M. Pirine, a friend of Leslie's, noticed Mike Killeen approaching and attempted to alert Leslie. Before Leslie could react, Killeen discharged 2 shots, grazing Leslie's head and momentarily disorienting him. Killeen then physically assaulted Leslie with his revolver. In the ensuing struggle, Killeen sustained a mortal gunshot wound. Before succumbing to his injury 5 days later, Killeen accused Pirine of firing the fatal shot. Both Leslie and Pirine faced murder charges, but Leslie successfully argued self-defense and maintained P. Ryan's innocence. The court accepted this version of events, and both men were exonerated. Merely 8 days following Mike Killeen's demise, Mary Killeen and Leslie exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Remarkably, 13-year-old Louisa Bellick reprised her role as maid of honor, having served in the same capacity at Mary's previous wedding. The Tombstone epitaph reported on the event, noting that the ceremony took place in the hotel's parlor for a select group of close associates, including prominent Tombstone figures. The newspaper offered its congratulations to Leslie, describing him as a knight without fear or reproach, and extended wishes for the couple's future happiness. Buckskin Frank had two significant encounters with James Young in Tombstone, Arizona. In both instances, Leslie demonstrated restraint and avoided escalating the conflicts. The first incident occurred when Young discovered Leslie had encroached on his mining claim. Young, armed with a shotgun, demanded Leslie vacate the area immediately. Leslie responded diplomatically, stating he was there to safeguard Young's claim from potential interlopers. This confrontation became town gossip, enhancing Young's reputation while somewhat tarnishing Leslie's. Their paths crossed again inside a local store. Young, with his back turned and unarmed, was unaware of Leslie's presence. Leslie drew his firearm, appearing ready to use it, but the female shop owner intervened by screaming and positioning herself between them. Leslie again diffused the situation, casually explaining he was merely inspecting his weapon's functionality. On May 26, 1882, a devastating fire swept through Tombstone, destroying much of the town, including the Cosmopolitan Saloon, co-owned by Leslie and William Knapp. Rather than rebuilding, Leslie took a position as a bartender at another saloon, one of the few structures that survived the blaze. Towards the end of that year, Leslie partnered with Milton E. Joyce, a former shareholder of that local saloon. They acquired land near the Swiss Helm Mountains in southeastern Arizona and established a ranch called the Magnolia. In 1885, Leslie became the sole proprietor when Joyce sold his share to him. While working at the last standing saloon in November 1882, Leslie had yet another confrontation with an inebriated Billy Claiborne. Despite Leslie's attempt to peacefully remove Claiborne from the premises, Claiborne continued his abusive behavior and threatened retaliation. Shortly after, Leslie was warned of an armed individual waiting outside. Upon exiting, he spotted a rifle barrel protruding from behind a fruit stand. Leslie attempted to reason with Claiborne, but Claiborne opened fire anyway, missing his target. Leslie returned fire, striking Claiborne in the chest. As Claiborne collapsed, pleading for mercy, Leslie held his fire. Interestingly, Leslie had originally planned to travel to the Dragoon Mountains with George W. Parsons that day, but the trip was canceled. Parsons later recounted the incident, noting Leslie's remarkable composure during the gunfight, observing that Leslie's cigarette remained lit throughout the confrontation. A coroner's inquest concluded that Leslie had acted in self-defense, and the jury deemed the shooting justified. In 1885, Buckskin Frank embarked on a brief stint as a scout for the 4th Cavalry, serving for about a month. The following year, he sought a position as a customs inspector while continuing occasional scouting work. By April 1886, Leslie had built a significant reputation, as evidenced by a San Francisco Chronicle report detailing his arrival in town as a mounted customs inspector. The newspaper highlighted his previous role as chief of scouts, his close association with General Crook, and his acquaintance with notable figures like Geronimo. The article also mentioned Leslie's recent visit to a camp of hostile prisoners at White's Ranch, where he had engaged in discussions with the prisoners alongside General Crook and his staff. During this period, Leslie's personal life took a tumultuous turn. His wife, Mary Jane May Leslie, initiated divorce proceedings in 1886, citing infidelity with a woman named Bertie Woods and allegations of physical abuse. She claimed Leslie had violently assaulted her on March 9, 1887. The court granted the divorce on June 3rd and imposed significant financial and property penalties on Leslie. he was ordered to pay his wife $650, transfer a quarter of his Magnolia Ranch to her, relinquish 13 horses and 150 cattle, and cover all of her legal expenses. Following his divorce, Leslie began a relationship with Molly Edwards, who moved into his ranch. However, this relationship ended in tragedy on July 10, 1889. Leslie, under the influence of alcohol, returned home to find Molly in the company of a man named James Neal. In a fit of rage, Leslie reportedly exclaimed, "I'll settle this," before fatally shooting Molly. He then fired twice at Neal, striking him in the chest and arm, but Neal managed to escape. Neal, severely wounded, was transported to Tombstone for medical attention. There, he was treated by Dr. George E. Goodfellow, a surgeon renowned for his expertise in gunshot wounds. Leslie was apprehended the same day and incarcerated. After a 2-day hearing, he was denied bail and ordered to await trial in Tucson. The coroner's jury concluded that Leslie had criminally and intentionally killed Molly Edwards, with the evidence clearly supporting this verdict. In January 1890, Frank Leslie entered a guilty plea for first-degree murder. A Sacramento Daily Record Union article noted that Leslie, once celebrated for his valor during the Custer Massacre and his scouting work under Generals Crook and Miles, was likely to face life imprisonment. His previous reputation as a courageous scout had been eclipsed by his violent actions. The court sentenced him to life at Yuma Territorial Prison, where he was assigned to inmate number 632. Shortly after his incarceration, Leslie participated in an unsuccessful escape attempt with 5 other prisoners. As punishment, he was placed in solitary confinement. Upon release from isolation, Leslie's behavior underwent a remarkable transformation. He became an exemplary inmate and assumed the role of pharmacist in the prison infirmary, earning the favor of prison officials. A San Francisco Chronicle interview revealed that the prison superintendent held Leslie in high regard, praising his exemplary conduct and valuable contributions to the prison pharmacy. Leslie enjoyed certain privileges, such as wearing civilian clothes and having unrestricted access to his well-maintained workspace at the prison drugstore. Towards the end of 1893, Leslie initiated correspondence with Belle Stowell, a 36-year-old divorced woman from San Francisco. Their exchange of letters kindled hope for Leslie's future. In 1896, the Tombstone Prospector reported that Arizona's governor, Benjamin J. Franklin, was considering clemency for Leslie. On November 17, 1896, Governor Franklin issued a full and unconditional pardon to Leslie. Upon his release, Leslie promptly departed Arizona, relocating to Los Angeles and taking up residence at the Natick House, marking the beginning of a new phase in his life. In late 1896, Buckskin Frank journeyed to Stockton, California, where his fiancée, Belle Stowell, secured a marriage license. Leslie, introducing himself as Nashville Franklyn Leslie and claiming Virginian origins, stating he was 55 years old and resided in San Carlos, Arizona. His bride-to-be, Belle, described herself as a 39-year-old widow from Warren County, Illinois. Local media outlets reported the couple's plans for a Chinese honeymoon, which never materialized. Within 4 months, unconfirmed rumors of their separation began to circulate. It wasn't until 1903 that Belle formally initiated divorce proceedings, citing Leslie's inability to provide financial support. By spring 1897, Leslie had moved back to Fort Worth, Texas, reuniting with an old acquaintance, John Ralph Dean. Leslie found employment as a bartender at Dean's Delaware Cafe. The following year, Leslie became involved in the formation of the Copper River Gold Mining and Prospect Company, an enterprise aimed at exploring Alaskan goldfields. However, Leslie never reached Alaska. Instead, by April 1898, he had traveled to Mexico, where he was observed preparing for an expedition with notable individuals, including Dr. George Goodfellow. Leslie's Mexican sojourn was short-lived. He later asserted involvement in the Spanish-American War, claiming to have enlisted with one of the initial Arizona companies recruited by Theodore Roosevelt. According to Leslie's account, he served under General Lawton's command in Cuba and sustained injuries during the conflict. However, historical documentation does not fully corroborate his claimed participation in the war. Following his alleged war involvement, Leslie made his way back to Arizona in August 1898, taking on the role of guide for a geological survey team searching for coal deposits. The expedition, led by Professor Edwin Theodore Dumble, lasted several months, with Leslie recognized as one of Dumble's essential team members. In 1899, during an excursion to Sonora, Mexico, Leslie had a close call when Yaqui bandits robbed him, taking his weapons and possessions but sparing his life. After a brief stint in San Francisco, Leslie found himself drawn back to Mexico, where he began working for the Mulatos Mining Company around 1900. He remained active in mining ventures, even penning articles about the company's operations for a Nogales newspaper in 1902. However, his time in San Francisco was marred by legal troubles. In November 1900, Leslie and 3 associates attempted to swindle a Nevada mining businessman, J.P. Reynolds. Although Reynolds evaded financial loss, Leslie and his cohorts were apprehended on vagrancy charges. A more severe incident unfolded in December 1902, when Leslie and his accomplices deceived George V. Voss into cashing a fraudulent check for $675. Voss promptly reported the scam, leading to Leslie's arrest. That same month, Leslie suffered an accidental gunshot wound when his pistol fell and discharged, injuring his leg and head. He received medical treatment at a San Francisco hospital. In 1913, Leslie attempted to establish a homestead on Washington's Orcas Island. However, his claim was revoked the following year due to his failure to reside on or develop the land. Around this time, Leslie married Elnora Nora Cast in Napa, California. At 74, he still listed his occupation as a miner and continued to pursue new ventures, including a potential Mexican expedition. The last known record of Leslie places him in Sausalito, California in 1920 at the age of 77. Beyond this point, no further documentation of his life exists, and the circumstances of his death remain unknown. Despite his colorful past and notoriety as an Old West figure, Buckskin Frank Leslie's later years faded into obscurity, leaving behind a mysterious legacy that continues to fascinate historians to this day.